Hello and welcome back to Geopolitical Cousins. I am your editor, Jacob. This is a show where analysts Jacob Shapiro and Marko do their very best to make sense of the world, generally by disagreeing about it. Think of this as your weekly escape from stupid hot takes and headline hysteria.
No, I'm not criticizing.
In this show, the boys zoom out, they look at the structural stuff that actually matters, and occasionally admit that the other one has a point.
No, not forever. Not forever. Yeah, I agree with you. Not forever.
It's fine. I don't think that's sycophantic ass kissing. I'm just saying something much less ambitious. I'm just saying none of it is true.
Emphasis on occasionally. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Please tell your grandma about the show, and if you enjoyed it, leave a review. Let's get into it.
All right, a podcast that will live in infamy. Our listeners aren't going to get the joke because we're recording December 7th. This is going to come out tomorrow. But anyway, we are recording on a day of infamy, a podcast of infamy. Cousin, how's it going, man? I hope you're doing better than the Raccoon that terrorized that store in Ashland, stealing multiple bottles of bourbon before passing out in the bathroom. That's how I feel sometimes at the end of the week.
You know what? My X algorithm just feeds me a lot of animal stories. It's just gotten like a path to my heart. And so that just hit me right away and I sent it to you. I thought it was so hilarious and cute. Raccoons kind of have opposable thumbs. Not really, but they kind of do. So I can totally see how like this guy just walks into a liquor store and starts opening bottles and then ends up on the bathroom floor just dead. It was awesome.
Well,
he's not dead, actually. He's fine.
He's not dead. The story was great. The picture was great because I got a picture of the raccoon passed out on the bathroom floor. And then whoever for the local paper was writing the story and treated it as if a masked bandit had robbed the liquor store. Also, like 10 out of 10. It was really a win on all levels there. And yeah, the thing about the algorithm, like I get fed animal stuff too. And I have finally purged my algorithm of this. But there was like a month where I was getting these very strange videos where like somebody was scraping barnacles off of whales and turtles and other things. And at first I thought it was real, but then it was fake. And then it kept on getting weirder and weirder. And now they've gone away. I don't know what happened, but yeah, that's why people listen to me to talk about this, right? My only other thing, cousin, I want to start with this out at the beginning. You probably saw that Zion has an adductor strain and that reportedly Joe Dumars is looking to trade him for whatever the most reasonable offer is out there. Pelicans also, is it the worst record in the league right now after trading their first round pick next year? So really just covering myself in glory with my basketball fandom. Whereas your Los Angeles Lakers, I mean, going from strength to strength, LeBron's actually taking a helpful supporting role. Did you have that on your bingo card?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did. I thought it was possible that it would happen. And I think, so much, it's so funny because, when you think about leadership and corporations and different ways to incorporate humans, I obviously love sports analogies, but it's important to understand what kind of company you're building. So basketball, the reason that Phil Jackson is one of the greatest coaches ever is because he really did just do the qualitative kumbaya stuff. Because chemistry really matters on a basketball team. It's 5 guys, you share the ball, you got to set the off the ball picks, you got to do the dirty work. But when it comes to like baseball, it really doesn't. Like, you can just have like 5 assholes who hit like 380. You're good. You're going to win the title. If they hate each other, it's fine. As long as they don't use the bat on each other in the dugout. Like that is literally the only thing you got to avoid. And I thought that was interesting. I think it was really important that LeBron did accept that kind of like more of a, conciliatory role. But we do know he's a diva. He made the pass to Rui Hachimura, if people haven't seen it, to win the game, broke his double-digit streak. But then he made a big deal about it. You know what I mean? It was like, I was so selfless, covered this story incessantly. It's like, okay, LeBron, we get it. It's okay, whatever. He's like 41, man. He's like our age, Jacob, okay?
I know. Well, no, I guess he is our age. I love Phil Jackson. I'm just going to read a quote from Phil Jackson's book, and then we can dispense with the basketball. But, I mean, when Marko says that Phil Jackson literally was only good at team chemistry. He's not kidding, because like the triangle offense, everything else, he didn't even design it. He implemented it, and it's questionable whether that was actually what worked. But in Phil Jackson's own words, another Lakota practice I adopted was beating a drum when I wanted the players to congregate in the tribal room for a meeting. The tribal room, aka the video room, was decorated with several Indian totems I'd been given over the years: a bear claw necklace, the middle feather of an owl, a painting illustrating the story of Crazy Horse's journey, and photos of a newborn white buffalo calf, a symbol of prosperity and good fortune. Sometimes, when we lost a particularly lopsided game, I'd light a sage stick, a Lakota tradition, and playfully wave it through the air to purify the locker room. That's Phil Jackson for you. That would not fly. He'd get canceled for that today, probably, if he was doing Lakota practices.
Is that from Sacred Hoops?
I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah, great book.
Just incredible. Okay, and last but not least, I think, Marko, I can feel in my bones I'm going to be a little bit critical of President Trump today. So I want to start off by saying something nice about him. I mean, I think it's kind of vainglorious that he named them after himself, although he names everything after himself. But I think the Trump accounts, this like amount of money that's going to every single child born in the United States that's going to be invested in passive indices and things like that, I think that might be one of the single most important federal government policies for helping lower poverty in the history of our nation, full stop. I don't know if you saw the Dells are going to throw billions of dollars at making up the gap for the last couple of years. Much appreciated, Dell family, from somebody who had daughters in 22 and 24 and does not get to avail himself of the Trump accounts. That might be the biggest philanthropic initiative in United States history, for all I want to say. It's not great that we have to rely on billionaires and these sorts of things in order to get rid of poverty in the United States. But I just want to say, like, I got this question the other day when I was doing a presentation. Is there any Trump administration policy that you like? I love Trump accounts. I think they're brilliant. I don't know why they weren't done before. Hats off to you, President Trump. We can call them Trump accounts. I want one for both of my daughters. Well done. Anything you want to add on that before we before I start digging in?
No, I mean, cool. Yeah, Trump accounts, good idea. Again, I think the issue is, you know, what I would say is people in America struggle to move between income levels, not because they don't have money. It's because they don't have access to things that make you middle class at a high quality level.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, you know, the idea is like, well, you have money, you can pay for it. Yeah, I mean, maybe, you know, but if you don't have really good childcare, if you don't have daycare, if you don't have primary, secondary, and tertiary universities that are affordable or levels of education, and if you ultimately don't have access to like housing and public spaces that are nice, like those are the things that matter, I think. So yes, obviously I'm not criticizing Trump accounts, but it's a typical sort of policy that someone like Trump has to impose on the public because the two parties don't want to sit down and be like, okay, cool. Should we make universities cheaper for people? Should we have affordable healthcare that's really good? How do we deal with a housing problem in America? You know, like these are issues, and the two parties just don't want to talk about it. And it's not even at a congressional level; it's on a state level. You know, on a state level, this is a problem, and so then the solution is let's just give people money to fix it. And that was the solution after the pandemic. That's the solution with Trump accounts. So yeah, like, obviously awesome, well done, but it's just a symptom of how much the rest of the country could use some more innovative policy to fix access to the things that you need to pay for.
Well, yeah, it's in the fabric of the American psyche, too. You and I invoke the 1890s and the Gilded Age a lot on this podcast from a foreign policy perspective, but it also, this sort of move also harkens back to the 1890s and early 1900s, because there was this notion that the United States markets would work everything out. And so there were these really, really rich Gilded Age entrepreneurs, and their job was to give back. There was a social responsibility to give charity. It wasn't the government's job to take care of people who were left behind. It was actually the job of the uber rich and the uber wealthy to provide for the poor who couldn't, you know, make it as a result of whatever happened in the market. So I think there's actually longstanding U.S. political tradition here, because if you go the opposite direction, you inevitably have to talk about the state providing these things. And never in U.S. history, I mean, outside of FDR and LBJ maybe, like I don't think we've seen real movements in the United States to have the state provide for people in that way. And you start dancing with socialism and social democracy and all these other things when you get down that rabbit hole. So I think it also affects there too. Okay.
All right, let's geopolitics time.
Yeah. Let's cook. Yes, sorry. Well, I think I was mildly geopolitical, but let's start to ease.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just like exalting.
I know. I'm also chomping at the bit. There's a lot to get to. I also, well, I'll actually ease us in one more way. Marko, when did you start thinking that Kevin Hassett was going to be the pick for Fed chair?
The moment the list was read out, I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but I always thought that he would make the most sense for President Trump. Least likely to go rogue, really tough to remove a Fed chair once they're imposed. So you want to make sure that if you care about having influence over monetary policy as a, denizen of the White House, you don't want to give it to some like very big personality, who may be loyal at this moment, but when the sweet nectar of institutional power gets into their head, are they going to go rogue on you?
Yeah. Well, on Polymarket, when the list was first put out, you could have had odds on Kevin Hassett at around 20%. He was not the favorite category, and you could have gotten those odds through most of September, October. In November, he started to climb 35 to 40, and he only rocketed up to the main choice in the last 2 weeks. So yet another example of how you can do things. I also just want to quote Mr. Hassett himself. He said, "I think that the American people should expect President Trump to pick somebody, aka me, who's going to help them have cheaper car loans and easier access to mortgages at lower rates." That's what we saw in the market response to the rumor about me, which is just our never-ending argument, Marko, in which you say this administration is going to be forced to be fiscally conservative. And I say you have not seen anything yet. They're just getting started with the stimulus.
No. Hold on. Time out.
Okay. Let's get the tribal drum in here. Let's start burning.
But I'm absolutely correct. You're conflating. No, I'm sorry, but you're conflating fiscal with monetary stimulus. This is literally my forecast for the next year. Fiscal stimulus is done, Jacob. Zero of it will appear. It is because fiscal stimulus can no longer be enacted. Fiscal stimulus means check directly to a human being. It means more investment from the government to build some stupid factory. Once the bond market bars you from doing that, you have to move to monetary policy. And that's what that statement proves. And this is very important for investors because fiscal stimulus means more growth, means maybe more inflation, means higher bond yields, whereas monetary policy means the opposite. It means the manipulation of those very bond yields by the government in order to stimulate the economy, which has, the two have profound different currency and bond market implications. So yes, I think that statement reveals the fact that they can't give you any more money, right? Because the only way to make you now spend more, given that there's no more money left, is to lower borrowing rates. And that's been my view for the past 6 months, that that's where they're headed. And, there were little drips, little evidence that this was in the works when President Trump hinted that they might declare a housing emergency, when their housing secretary started talking about 100-year mortgages and assumable portable mortgages. I think that's actually, that's why it becomes, because fiscal stimulus is done, because Congress is not going to pass it, because President Trump can't figure out where to find any more money, because of all of those things, it becomes so critical to have your own person at the Fed.
Yeah, well, the place where I think I disagree is just that I'm not sure that fiscal is quite played out, and maybe it is. Maybe I'm misapprehending the level of constraints that are on Trump. But from the Trump accounts to the talk of the $2,000 tariffs, I don't think he's done finding a way to try to push fiscal through the system. But
well, the $2,000 rebate is interesting. So he's proposed it. Bessent is dancing around it. But like Senator Thune in the Senate, he's the majority leader, said, no, we're not going to use tariff rebate to give people money. So then this is what I think is critical. And for those of you listening to this and you're like, what's the difference between fiscal and monetary policy? It kind of doesn't matter, for a normal human being. But it does matter from like the implications for the markets. But I do think that the days, and we've had 5 years of this, where you just get a check, that's not going to happen, because it's not just the bond market that doesn't want it, it's also Republicans in Congress. So the tariff rebate has landed on very unhappy ears of various conservatives. And so that's why it's going to require President Trump to manipulate and force borrowing rates, particularly mortgages, down. So if you were thinking of buying a house, for example, right now, let's break this down, What's a $2,000 check from the government going to do to you? Oh, that's right, nothing. $2,000 from the government doesn't do anything. But if you want to buy a house, this idea that mortgage rates are going to be suppressed should make you want to buy a house right away. Yes, go out. Like, this is a practical advice I have for you right now. Go and buy a house. Oh, Marko, but mortgages are at 6%. Yes, but they're not going to be there for long. And if they go down, as I expect them to go down, because Kevin Hassett and Trump and Besson say, hey, we need to make things affordable. As that happens, you will see house prices go up because there'll be suddenly more liquidity and demand. And so the best time to buy a home actually is right now. Bite the bullet, take that 30 or 6% mortgage rate before, things start getting silly. But that's their next step. That's how I think the President Trump is going to extend this cycle. That's why I'm not bearish. I know this podcast is not for investors, but really, I just think that they're going to do whatever it takes. And in this particular case, that's not fiscal, it's monetary. That's why your question of who's the Fed chair is so important. If they just had room to fiscally stimulate, hell, Jay Powell could stay as the chair and it wouldn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you mentioned the word affordable. I mean, I thought affordability was a Democratic hoax. So, I don't think we need to put any stock in affordability. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, because you're right. I don't think the $2,000 tariff payments are going to happen. But the Trump accounts, that's fiscal stimulus. The payouts for U.S. farmers that are coming or are soon to come, that's also fiscal stimulus. Like, he's finding ways to helicopter it in. I think his impulse is to go pedal to the metal on both. I think I might end up agreeing with you that monetary is going to win out, but I do think we're going to be in this weird period for a couple of months where he's pushing in both directions. And maybe markets won't know what to do with that, or maybe there'll be a push and pull. I don't know.
Well, everything I just said is kind of similar to fiscal policy, except where interest rates go. In an independent world where the central bank is not being manipulated, fiscal stimulus should increase borrowing rates. And we're at the end of that because that can no longer happen. But in the world I'm describing, you actually suppress borrowing costs. And so I think it's dangerous to short the market in that world. By the way, one thing I would just disagree with is that the Trump credits, is that what we're calling them? They were actually financed by One Big Beautiful Bill. So they're not new fiscal policy necessarily. The farm stuff, I'm not sure. Maybe it will be new. Congress I can see them passing something. So you're right, there's still going to be some stuff, but the Trump credits themselves were passed in One Big Beautiful Bill. So they're kind of like already priced in by the bond market and everything else. So I wouldn't say that that's new fiscal stimulus. The rebate would be the big one. The rebate is going to be the big one. If they pass that, then, I'm going to have an egg on my face, because here it is. There's more fiscal. But I think, maybe I lose a battle or two, but I think I'm going to win the war over the course of 26, in that I just don't think the bond market can allow us to have any more fiscal. And that then, again, puts the onus on suppressing borrowing costs. That's the only way to juice up the economy going forward. And by the way, I want to just say something. There's a lot of criticism of President Trump wanting lower interest rates and having his own person at the Fed. That's actually traditional form of presidents manipulating markets. This whole idea where you just spend money fiscally, that's new. That hasn't happened ever since LBJ. That was Biden and Trump novelty. Obama never did that. But this whole idea of keeping interest rates lower than they should be, oh my God, George W. Bush did that. Obama did, we all did that. That's classical way that presidents and the Fed end up juicing the economy and causing a burger bubble down the road. Right. So we're coming back to that.
I agree with that. And that's why I always said I was much more disturbed earlier this year about the intervention with the Bureau of Labor Statistics than I was anything that was going on at the Fed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is not something we've really touched really since the 1920s was the last and only time anyone was fooling around with the objective collection of data. Like that was a little bit beyond. But with the Fed, you're right. He just does it in a very particularly in his own Trumpian way. I had a conspiracy theorist come to me after I gave a presentation last week, Marko, and he said, every single US president that's been assassinated has been on the wrong side of the Fed chair. So you just put that in your mind, Jacob. You need to read some books and understand the power that the Fed chair and the people that control the Fed chair has. So
What?
There you go.
What?
I know. It's one of the amazing things about speaking about politics. Somebody will listen to you for an hour and think you're absolutely brilliant and then come over and talk your ear off for 10 minutes, insisting that they know better than you about all the things that you just talked about. I find this across the board when it comes to consulting about politics.
It's like sport. I compare this expertise to that of sports because it must be so frustrating for someone who actually works for a professional team or coaches it, because everybody thinks they're an expert at sport because they watch it. And you're like, okay, well, I can't actually do that because, but whatever, sure. And that's how I feel. But you know what? I embrace it. It's fun. And there's nothing more I love than listening to someone give a conspiracy theory view and then breaking it down. And usually the way I break it down is, do you think politicians are brilliant? And they're like, no, they're dumb. I'm like, so how do they execute on your conspiracy theory?
Yeah. All right. Let's back into the next sort of three things we need to talk about, a little 3-pack here. And we were originally going to record earlier this week, but our schedules didn't line up quite right. So I had prepared a bunch of things on Honduras and a bunch of things on Venezuela. And then in the last couple of days, or really yesterday, the White House released its national security strategy. This document has been in the ether for months. Like we've been hearing about it for months. We've been hearing about the different debates behind the scenes for months. I was actually kind of eager to see it. And there's a lot of interesting things to talk about here. Why don't we start maybe, Marko, at that top-down level with the national security strategy, and then we can back into Honduras and Venezuela, because I think I think it kind of works out well.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to read this document, this national security strategy, Marko?
Yes, unlike everybody on Twitter.
Yeah, unlike
or journalists covering it.
What's your first reaction? I'll leave it open-ended there at first.
So I think this is where we're going to have a debate, Cousin Jacob, which is fine. That's what we do. We are setting an example for the rest of the world when we disagree, because I think it is the best document on foreign policy published since I've been alive.
Wow. Okay.
By the U.S. This is as good as it's going to get from Washington, D.C.
Okay. Tell me why.
I can see. By the way, for those of you not watching the video, Jacob is stabbing himself in the neck.
No,
right
I'm
now
not.
with a
I'm
pencil.
drinking coffee out of my mug that has a picture of Donald Trump doing his presentation at the Four Seasons Landscaping Company at the end of his first administration. It's a lovely little mug.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Thank you to my brother-in-law for the gift. It was really great.
Okay, so I think that the document basically recognizes that the world is multipolar and that the way to ensure prosperity in a multipolar world is to play the role of an offshore balancer that, yes, on occasionally intervenes directly, but not in a way that commits the U.S. to the long term in terms of any conflict. It sets out that balance of power really matters, which means that the document states effectively that the U.S. wants to freeze spheres of influence in their current manifestation. It effectively echoes the famous Lord Palmerston quote, which is that the United Kingdom at the time, this is mid-19th century, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom has no eternal allies, no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests it is our duty to follow. And aside from that, it recommits some red lines that I thought it wouldn't. So the focus on Latin America, the focus on Monroe Doctrine is heavy. I'm going to let you cook on that because I think that's something you're passionate about. I was concerned that focus would then give a signal to American adversaries, China and Russia, to do whatever they want in their spheres. And the media has certainly picked up on that narrative. That's not true. They're using AI to like summarize the document. The document is very clear about the importance of other places. Yes, Europe gets kind of like a talking to, very critical of Europe on weird issues like immigration and other things. But then the strategy says, yet Europe remains strategically and culturally vital to the United States. Transatlantic trade remains one of the pillars of the global economy and of American prosperity. European sectors from manufacturing to technology to energy remain among the world's most robust. Europe is home to cutting-edge scientific research and world-leading cultural institutions. Not only can we not afford to write Europe off, doing so will be self-defeating for what this strategy aims to achieve. So this isn't an abandonment of Europe. And similarly, when it comes to Asia, there's a real focus on Taiwan. So did not abandon Taiwan in any shape, way, or form. In fact, again, to quote from the strategy, a favorable conventional military balance remains an essential component of strategic competition. Hence, deterring a conflict over Taiwan, ideally by preserving military overmatch, is a priority. And we will also maintain our longstanding declaratory policy on Taiwan, meaning that the United States does not support any unilateral change to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. There's also a bunch of stuff on, South China Sea and so on. And then finally, when it comes to China, this was the first document since Trump came to power, and he had many documents talking all sorts of stuff on China. And then Joe Biden tripled down on that nonsense. But in this document, there's this sense that, like, yes, China's an adversary, but we want to trade with them. We think we can actually increase our GDP to $40 trillion through mutually beneficial. It's almost like that Xi Jinping statement, win-win. There's that sense that, like, yeah, we're going to like manage a relationship with China, but we're not going to stop trading. There's no bifurcation. There's no decoupling. And in fact, they also talk about how United States of America has to compete with China for neutral countries, for the global South, for Latin America. There's a sense that these countries have actually become friendly with China, not because they're pro-China. And I'll read another quote. This is from your wheelhouse. This is on the Monroe Doctrine in the Western Hemisphere. Some foreign influence will be hard to reverse. Many governments are not ideologically aligned with foreign powers, but are instead attracted to doing business with them for other reasons, including low costs and fewer regulatory hurdles. In the Western Hemisphere and everywhere in the world, the United States should make clear that American goods, services, and technologies are a far better buy in the long term. Hey, that's awesome. Yeah. You don't like it that Argentina sells a lot of soybeans to China? Like, well, then sell something else to Argentina or buy something else from them. Compete with China. That's healthy and positive for the rest of the world. So, generally speaking, there's a lot of other things in here, but I think the focus on balance of power and offshore balancing is healthy for the world and for the US, I think.
Yeah. I want to read a couple of sentences from, this is page 12 of it. It's the principles for the strategy. President Trump's foreign policy is pragmatic without being pragmatist, realistic without being realist, principled without being idealistic, muscular without being hawkish, and restrained without being dovish. All of that gobbledygook to me means it is nothing and everything at the same time. And that is sort of my feeling.
That was my favorite paragraph.
Yeah, it was real. And honestly, up until that paragraph, I was thinking about it in sort of the frame,
That's so funny.
in sort of the frame that you were. I was like, you know what? There's actually some good things here. Like, we're recognizing that non-interference is a good idea. We're recognizing some mistakes. Like, it seems to be, a little bit aware of what the United States was. And after that paragraph, I think the document just goes unhinged. And there's a lot of different things that we can talk about. The first, and I'm surprised, because the next paragraph after that paragraph describes President Trump as the president of peace. And the examples for this are his deals with Cambodia and Thailand, which, by the way, has already gone to shit. Cambodia and Thailand are fighting with each other again. Kosovo and Serbia, which, did I miss something, Cousin Marko? Did Serbia and Kosovo put their arms down because of something President Trump did? The DRC and Rwanda, still an ongoing conflict. Nothing has changed there. Pakistan and India also has not brought peace between Pakistan and India. They just stopped shooting at each other, not because of anything he did, but that's the narrative that Trump wants to spin. He's taking credit for Israel and Iran's ceasefire, for Egypt and Ethiopia, which okay, Ethiopia is about to descend into civil war and maybe we're going to have something else there. Armenia and Azerbaijan, that's from years ago, and ending the war in Gaza with all living hostages returned. Great. Also, Gaza got turned into a parking lot and has basically been obliterated. Also, not to mention, I mean, we've still got horrible conflict in Sudan. I don't know if you've seen the numbers out of Sudan lately. It's absolutely like bone-crushingly depressing if you deal with Sudan at all. So like you just look around, he's calling himself the president of peace. Like that sort of turned me off. But I actually thought one of the more interesting things was, because we can go through a lot of it, but there were really
Yeah.
two. The first was the emphasis on the primacy of nations and the
Yeah.
almost allergic reaction
That's
to
important.
international organizations in general. And I bring it up because in some sense, it is the most geopolitical document I've ever seen out of American foreign policy ever.
Yeah, that's
Because that's like geopolitics is all about the world's fundamental political unit being the nation state, and that nations prioritize their interests, and that you should use, or that nations should define their policy in terms of literally the biological imperatives of the state itself. Now you can see how that goes off the rails a little bit. Like the Nazis loved geopolitics because they took that principle and said, hey, we're superior to the Slavs. We need to expand the living space of the German nation into these other lands, which should have been ours in the first place. And we have this primacy of nations thing. So the document is trying to say the primacy of nations is going to lead to peace, whereas most history shows us that the primacy of nations does not necessarily lead to peace. And it's just it's an interesting one that we can talk about. And then the second thing, aside from the hemispheric competition that we can also talk about, and which I also just like have a bone to pick with the document because it's trying to present this Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine without one mention of Teddy Roosevelt's Roosevelt corollary. Like it has to be the Trump corollary to the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. We don't get to just skip over what Teddy Roosevelt did. The Monroe Doctrine was about, okay, European powers are not allowed to colonize parts of Latin America, and we will not interfere in European affairs as a result. The Roosevelt corollary is President Teddy Roosevelt saying that the U.S. could intervene in Latin America to prevent European intervention, also to act as a police power to ensure stability or repay debts or protect American interests. You can see where that gets bigger and bigger. And what Trump is saying is, okay, and now we will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. And that has implications way beyond Venezuela. China's buying up all the port infrastructure in Peru. Does this mean that the United States is now going to go take the Chinese port infrastructure in Peru away from the Chinese? Does this mean that they're just going to occupy the Panama Canal as they threatened early on in the administration? If there's any sort of non-hemispheric intervention, is that like, are they actually like writing that check and are they going to cash it? And then the last thing is just, and this one made me sit up in my chair a little bit too, because, you know, I'm often in the investing space, but I'm still advising companies on global supply chains here and there. And there is a nod in there about how the U.S. intelligence community, that's the document's language, is going to monitor key supply chains and technological advances around the world and mitigate vulnerabilities and threats to American security and prosperity. That's the U.S. government saying, we're monitoring all global supply chains, and if something happens with supply chains we don't like, we are going to intervene. That's our province. That's our stated policy, which is why the beginning of the document, I think, falls on its face, because the beginning of the document is much more circumscribed. It's much more, okay, like we have to prioritize. We can't be everything to everyone everywhere. And then it goes, and because we can't do that, we have to be super strong and intervene everywhere all the time. The most lethal military, the best economy, the best goods, everything else. And then I know I'm going on and on, but the last thing I just want to say is that towards the end, it talks about how the United States should make it clear that American goods, services, and technology are a far better buy for everyone in the long run because they are of higher quality and do not come with the same kind of strings attached as other countries' assistance. I immediately thought of Luke Skywalker. I forget which one was it, The Last Jedi, and one of the newer ones where he looks at the Adam Driver character and says like, wow, everything you just said in that sentence was wrong. Everything in that sentence is wrong. American goods and services and technology are not a better buy. They are of lower quality, and they actually do come with the kinds of strings that other countries don't come with. This document is literally outlining the strings. It's saying there are strings attached and there are goodies attached if you also go along with the United States. So I don't know. I was just all over the place there. But pick at me. Tell me where I'm going off the ledge into Trump derangement syndrome.
Well, I would just simplify things. Look, all of these, I mean, the national security strategy says we're going to be different. We're not going to list all the different things like previous documents. And this is the shortest document, I think, that has ever been written. Maybe not ever, but certainly for the last 25 years, this is short. So I would like step back and focus on like what is the interesting new thrust. And it's what you identify. It's primacy of nations. And it's also this predisposition to non-intervention.
Ah, yes, the predisposition. I love that. Go. I'll cook on that in a second.
And that very paragraph says, very honestly, look, for a country whose interests are as numerous and diverse as ours, rigid adherence to non-interventionism is not possible. Yet this predisposition should set a high bar for what constitutes a justified intervention. So it does caveat it like, look, yeah, we're going to intervene. Yeah, our spies are going to be looking around for vulnerabilities. Sorry, it's the United States of America. But we're not going to intervene because we don't like what you're doing domestically. And I think this is what's important. Nazis did not put the nation state as the critical pillar of their ideology. They put race and nation. This is very, very important. Nazis did not produce a document when they said that effectively what you do domestically is of no concern to them, which is what this document says. Nazis had a sort of a bizarrely Kantian reaction to social Darwinism.
Yeah.
Like they were dreamers. They were ideologues. And this document is far more rooted in the 19th century than it is in the 1940s. And what I mean by that is that he basically says, look, the nation is the defining unit of analysis for us. And what countries do inside those nations, provided it does not hurt the United States of America, does not satisfy a threshold of intervention. So if you oppress women in your country, like, quite frankly, that's too bad for you because you're oppressing 51% of your population, but whatevs. Like, we will still strategically interact with you. And so that's where I think that it is a coherent document, even though if you're liberal, if you're like actually a liberal person that does believe in universal human rights, you will find this document abhorrent. The problem is that when you start intervening based on what are supposedly universal norms, number one, you don't really know. You're already being hypocritical because you will choose to intervene in country X. This suppresses its religious minority, but not in a country Y. So hypocrisy is built into your universal view of human rights because you're not actually trying to save everyone everywhere, because you can't. And the second problem is that how do you tone down the conflict? You just identified someone as inhumane. You just identified someone as the next Hitler. You can never then sit down with them. And where this strategy allows the United States of America, and that's why I actually love the paragraph that you hate. I love the paragraph because to me, it's not incoherent. To me, it's just saying like, look, it depends, okay? Are we going to always be peaceful? No, sometimes we're going to bomb the shit out of someone. Yes, facts. Are we going to be, realist? No, sometimes we're actually going to be somewhat ideological, like maybe on occasion, but like it's about flexibility. And that's where I also do think the one thing that irks you is that there's a lot of sycophantic terms and statements to President Trump, obviously. And I mean, this is the Trump administration, brother. Like, there's going to be a lot of ass kissing.
No,
so
and there's ass kissing. Like, this is my own pretension. Like here, like there's ass kissing in every single one of these documents. I just wish it were written at more than a fourth.
Oh no, there
yes,
isn't.
there is. It's just usually it's like a PhD level, and this is at a fourth grade reading level.
Yes.
Is really what's going.
No. Let me give you, like, you are correct. They're like listing Kosovo and Serbia is moronic. But Iran and Israel, I disagree with you. That's a great example of precisely this new American foreign policy. Israel goes and bombs Iran, tries to draw America in. America begrudgingly finishes the job or like whatever in Iran, and then tells Israel enough. And then in his statement ending the military conflict with Iran, President Trump says, God bless Iran. That's the foreign policy that this strategy says. So, well, the litany of examples you listed are truly just pieces of sycophantic ass kissing, like Cambodia, Thailand, and all this other stuff. The one that actually matters for the world, the Iran-Israel conflict, was ended by President Trump. No, not forever. Not forever.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Not forever.
It's fine. I don't think that's sycophantic ass kissing. I'm just saying something much more less ambitious. I'm just saying none of it is true. Like,
well, Iran-Israel is
okay,
true.
fine. So I'll give you 1 out of 9. The 8 out of 9 are not true.
I'm okay with, but the other 8 don't matter.
That's true. Probably.
I mean, and that's extremely callous for me to say, and this reveals how my nihilist view is obviously aligned with this strategy, right? Because your point was like, there's 60,000 people that died over the weekend in Sudan. You know, like, and my argument, my point, and I suspect many national security advisors to Trump would say is like, yeah, there's 60,000 people that die in Africa on a weekend quite often. Is the US going to pursue like a strategy to end that? Well, I mean, maybe we can't. You know, that's what this document says. Whereas Iran, Israel, the 1 out of 9 examples, and I agree with you, it's laughable. Like when they list all the ways that President Trump has ended, wars. But the one that actually is globally relevant on like a mega level was Israel and Iran. Israel tried to draw the United States of America into some sort of a multi-month, multi-year campaign in Iran of regime change. And President Trump said, no, I'm going to bomb this reactor, and then you're going to take your F-16s and go home. And then I'm going to say, God bless Iran at the end of my speech.
Yeah,
because I don't care what they do domestically. So that is the coherence of the strategy.
I hear you, and I'm going to push back again. So on Sudan, by the way, and part of the reason what's happening in Sudan is because the UAE and some of these other Gulf countries are messing around there as part of a proxy conflict. So the United States absolutely has levers of influence it could pull if it wanted to bring the fighting down a level in Sudan. Just to your point, nobody cares because it's Africa. There's a reason why Israel-Gaza soaks up all of the headlines and Israel-Palestine soaks up the headlines, but nobody cares about 60,000 Sudanese people. That's just the way that it works. I loved the predisposition to non-intervention. I've already referenced Star Wars. Let me make it even nerdier. I thought immediately of Star Trek and the Prime Directive, except if the Prime Directive was the maybe directive. This is the most important thing that we organize our entire policies by, and it's only sometimes. Like, I was just like, I couldn't do it. I think also, maybe I'm going to get in trouble with this, and push back if you think this is too much. But I think there is an element of race in this document and out of this administration. And I think it's subtle in the document. I see it in the document when they call out on...
I don't think it's subtle at all.
Oh, you don't think it's subtle? Okay, well, like, this line about how the U.S. can't achieve the strategy without growing numbers of strong traditional families that raise healthy children. That's not just a demographic argument. They're talking about the types of families, the skin color of families, the beliefs of those families. If you saw President Trump talking about, in his words, the Somalians, it's Somalis, wise guy, the Somalians, and how they destroyed Minnesota and everything else. By the way, these people supported President Trump in the last election, and he's just, I mean, you don't often see just unvarnished racism from top American politicians. It's usually couched in a, he just didn't care. He was just like, yeah, like Somalians, they're terrible. So I think there is an element of race that is getting pushed in there. I also just wanted to say, you said that, once you call somebody Hitler, you can't sit down next to them. Comrade Mamdani showed us that you actually can, which is maybe because he's Stalin in the metaphor, but he called him Hitler.
But that's a joke. That's a good joke. That is a good joke, and I tip my hat off to you. But it's irrelevant to this document because I can tell you what's been happening for the past 30 years of American foreign policy. And what's been happening for the past 30 years of American foreign policy is American politicians, PhDs, went to Georgetown, have CFR memberships and so on. What do? They decide to intervene in some country because, some minority is getting killed, even though we ignore when our allies do it. So there's wanton hypocrisy for the last 40 years. And then, because we need to rally the population to do that intervention, and we paint someone as a Hitler, we then don't know how to stop. And so, like, that's what I mean. Now, here's what I would say. This document is replete, maybe not with outright racism, but certainly, and I think that writers of this report would agree with me, with a civilizationism, right? So it's not about race necessarily, it's about civilization.
Sam Huntington,
And we need to
just
protect
cheering you on in the corner here.
cheering you on. But here's what I would say. What I would say is I don't see that connected to the rest of it. In other words, I can see a Democratic president who's liberal taking the parts of this national security that have nothing to do with like the immigration, civilization, healthy, strong babies who have good genes. What's up, sweetie? Call me. Right? Like you can just throw all that out and this document is still coherent. And it's that geopolitical coherence that I think is really the best articulation of where America is. Where I think you and I disagree with the most is the paragraph. You want to read it again? The awesome paragraph that you think is terrible. Like, let's do it again. So, pragmatist without pragmatism.
Yeah.
Just read that. Because I think this is key. This is a critical
President
part.
Trump's foreign policy is pragmatic without being pragmatist, realistic without being realist, principled without being idealistic, muscular without being hawkish, and restrained without being dovish. And I actually omitted 2 sentences. It is not grounded in traditional political ideology. It is motivated above all by what works for America, or in 2 words, America first.
So here's what I would say about that. I think that the reason I like that is because my biggest pet peeve, or not pet peeve, my biggest criticism of politicians and technocrats and people who run any country, certainly not just the US, is that they will create rules and norms of behavior and then defend the rules and norms instead of defending the outcomes. Right? So like, why do those rules and norms exist in the first place? Well, because you're trying to pursue outcomes. And this strategy is written so simply, Jacob. What do we want?
When do we want it?
You know, when do we want it? How do we get it? It's like, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So here's what I say that. What that paragraph says is like, we're going to be flexible. And by the way, this goes to monetary policy too. Central banks make idiotic decisions all the time. I 100% agree with Scott Besant's statement that a central bank job is universal basic income for a PhD in economics. Because nobody really knows what they do there, and they make mistakes all the fucking time.
But not Scotty.
And so,
Scotty doesn't make mistakes. Scotty's become an expert on everything from global geopolitics to I know. Yeah. Anyway.
But Jacob, you cannot just like focus on the Trump administration. We have to focus on the last 4 years, which has been a disaster. Disaster in the pursuit of idiotic norms and rules of behavior that create rigidity in application of foreign policy. And this document says we're not going to be rigid. Yeah, on occasion, we're going to be pragmatic. We don't want to intervene, but yeah, we'll bomb you if you do something that we don't like. And you know what we're going to do after we bomb you? Nothing. We're not going to try to fix your country. We're not going to try to make you into Wisconsin because we don't care what happens to your country. So the God bless Iran is actually the most denigrating statement I can make about Iran if I'm the president of the United States of America. God bless you, son. Good luck. Oh, you wanna subvert your women? Oh, you don't want to let LGBT community in your country have freedom of expression? I'm sure that's going to work out great for you when you take out 60-70% of your population and treat them poorly. I'm just going to bomb your nuclear program and bounce.
Yeah, it's like bless your heart, as we say here in the South.
Bless your heart. But what's my point about this? My point about this is that the U.S. is saying, like, look, we're going to focus on these issues. We're going to outline what these issues are, and the rest of you should do the same. And then we can find mutual ways to, like, come to an agreement. So, in a way, if this becomes the norm, I think the world will be a better place.
Okay. Well,
over the next 20 years.
And by the way, I think it's more than 40 years. Ironically, George Kennan and the X-Telegram, this is sort of what he was advocating for. He was saying it's more about the United States. Don't worry so much about these other things. And then Eisenhower and everybody after him said, oh no, we like containment. We're going to take this idea and we're going to contain people and we're going to go to Congo and we're going to go to Vietnam and we're going to do all these things. And you really get trapped in all these different policy choices.
And by the way, can don't lose your train of thought. I'm so sorry to interrupt
I have it written
because you're cooking. Okay, you're cooking and it's awesome, but let me explain what that means specifically. You say containment and domino theory, right? That is being kind of idealistic and realistic isms. So you get some center-left social democrat gets elected in Chile, and you're like, no, we're gonna kill them. Whereas if you have a flexible foreign policy, you can say, okay, cool. Like we're not going to pursue a foreign policy designed by metaphor. Domino theory, my ass. Like this center-left guy is not trying to bring in communism into Chile. Maybe some other one is. We'll send the CIA to one of them, not all of them. You know, it's a more limited, more, I think, like they say it's not pragmatic, but I do think this is pragmatic. Like, it's just like in some instances, yes, this will matter to the US. In some others, we can just let them experiment with slight socialism. So that's where you're totally right. Like the US foreign policy went offline when basically PhDs in political science and economics went to, you know, the planning department and started effectively linking foreign policy of the US with metaphor they invented in an ivory tower.
Yep. Which is the perfect segue, Marko, to, okay, like, I'm going to grant you the entire argument about the national security strategy. Like, let's say you win, I tip my cap, it's over. Then explain to me what the United States is doing with Venezuela and with Honduras. And let me just build it up a little bit here. So with Venezuela in the last week, it looked like we had quite an escalation last weekend. We had President Trump take to X and say, I'll quote him here, "To all airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. Anybody," and then he also talked about anybody doing drugs is subject to attack. For a second there, I was like, oh shit, is that the no-fly zone? Like, are we going? And people started like calling airlines and being like, are you flying? And people were, yeah, we're still flying. Like we haven't. So that was just Trump like on Truth Social late at night, tweeting some stuff that could have been absolutely monumental if it had been true, wasn't true. As we've talked about lately on the podcast a little bit, like Maduro has given Trump everything he wants. He's even offered him elections with his vice president taking over for an interim period. Would the elections be real? Of course not. It's farcical. He's an authoritarian thug. But this document says, who cares if he's an authoritarian thug? If he's willing to give us everything that we want, why can't we just deal with this asshole? Because he's bending the knee and China's already cut him loose, like he's absolutely going to do it. Same thing with Honduras. So Honduras has elections. President Trump, first of all, he pardons Juan Orlando Hernandez. I would invite people to go read the indictment of Juan Orlando Hernandez. I'll read just a couple of things from that indictment. He was at the center of one of the largest and most violent drug trafficking conspiracies in the world. Okay, he used his position to facilitate the importation of over 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. His co-conspirators are armed with machine guns, AK-47s, AR-15s, grenade launchers, which they used to protect their massive cocaine loads as they transported them across Honduras on their way to the United States. He received millions of dollars of drug money from some of the largest and most violent drug trafficking organizations in Honduras, Mexico, and elsewhere, and used those bribes to fuel his rise in Honduran politics. He used the armed Honduran National Police to protect their cocaine loads. He would throw, I'm not quoting anymore, he would take people who were in the drug business, if he didn't like them, if they were pushing back against them politically, he'd serve them up to the United States as, hey, get this guy, he's a drug lord. Whereas the drug lords that stayed with him, he would support them with the Honduran National Police and everybody else. This is the guy that President Trump said, and I'll quote the president here, hey, he was president of the country, and they basically said he was a drug dealer because he was president, and they said it was a Biden administration setup. I looked at the facts, and I agreed with them. That was a Biden horrible witch hunt. This guy's a fucking drug dealer, an arms trafficker and human trafficker and everything else. Okay, that's not partisan, that's not ideological, that's just what he is. So we pardon him. Not only do we pardon this guy, we also say, hey, Honduras, you're about to have elections. President Trump doesn't like the favorite candidate right now, this Salvador Nasrallah guy. We like this guy, Nasri Asfura, who is related politically to the Hernandez guy that we just talked about. So it would be really good for Honduras if it elected this guy. And it looks like Nasrallah is going to win, but it got very, very tight there. And it was so close that there was concerns about, is Honduras actually going to have a peaceful transition of power? Everything else. So if you're right about this document, what on earth are we doing with Venezuela? Because we've got a thuggish asshole who's willing to do whatever we want in Maduro and Venezuela. And what on earth are we doing preaching to the Hondurans? which presidential candidate they should pick and which one we're going to work with. Because it should be, we don't care. We'll work with whoever is in power and we'll screw anybody who works against our interests, which you would think a drug trafficker would be working against your interests. You wouldn't be pardoning this guy. Help me connect your point A to points B and C that we're seeing unfold before us. Because I think on the face of it, the document, I have all my problems with it. I actually think there are people who wrote that document who think what you think. They are not the ones making decisions. And that's not what U.S. foreign policy actually looks like. It's not animating it.
Yes. Well, what I would say to you is like, I agree with what you said at the end. So is the application of the new strategy going to be 100 out of 100? No, but I can barely find Honduras on the map. Okay, I'll be very honest with you. So I have but I can find Iran on the map. I can find Ukraine on the map. I can find Taiwan on the map.
Am I allowed to poke fun and say, didn't BCA Research just put out a thing about you thinking Latin America was like the big structural call for 2026 and you can't find Honduras on the map?
Because Honduras could disappear tomorrow and my call will still be right.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely irrelevant for everything. So I have no idea. Like, so here's what I'm saying. What I've seen from this administration on China, Taiwan, on Iran, Israel, and on Russia, Ukraine is largely supported by this document. But when it comes to Honduras, they freed some drug lord. You know? I have nothing to say. Because Honduras doesn't matter, Jacob, at all. It's irrelevant, except as a migration route. You know, I'm guessing that's why they're super like, you know, focused on it and want their own dictator to probably just prevent migration out of the country. I would assume that's the only way the United States of America, at least this administration, cares about Honduras. On Venezuela, I think that everything that's in the document is thus far compatible with the what's happening. What wouldn't be compatible is like ground troops in Venezuela trying to occupy the place and turn it into Wisconsin. But like bullying Maduro so that, I don't know, like I think President Trump got some really bad advice from Venezuela. I think what's happening with Venezuela is that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia showed up in the United States a couple of weeks ago and told President Trump the truth. Saudi Arabia cannot keep pumping OPEC oil at the same level. Oil prices are too low. Saudi Arabia gave President Trump 12 months of low oil prices. And I suspect that MBS told Trump, like, hey, you know, like, I need oil prices to go a little bit higher. And then somebody told President Trump, like, hey, Venezuela has the largest energy reserves in the world, which may or may not be true. Nobody even really knows. Who cares? And there's this very childlike focus on Venezuela because it has oil. And there's this view that like if Maduro gives America what it wants, suddenly oil prices will be low. I think that's where you can criticize the focus of Venezuela because it's almost a childlike view. Like, well, they have oil. Let's change the regime so they give us more oil. The truth is, Venezuela has destroyed the energy company that runs all of their production, PDVSA, so completely that it will take years for any oil barrels to come out. But I suspect that that's where the focus is. Now, the reason that I do think that the pressure on Maduro is compatible with the strategy is you've noticed no attempt to demonize Maduro in some sort of like a normative way at all. There's some stuff about drugs, but for the most part, he's like, hey, this guy's an asshole. We want him out. And there's no attempt to like create political buy-in inside the United States of America for a long-term intervention in Venezuela. It's pretty clear to everyone what U.S. is asking Venezuela is get this guy out, put our guy in, can be a general, can be an asshole, but we just want more oil barrels. I think that's consistent with this strategy.
Yeah, except that they've already offered it. But let me push back against you on Honduras a little bit. If listeners are looking for something to read over the break, I know we have to do an episode on our books and movies and things like that. But I read this year The Fish That Ate the Whale. It's about Samuel Zemurray. He was eventually president of United Fruit. And he was based down here in New Orleans. Many buildings on Tulane's campus were funded by this guy's money. And there's an incredible vignette in this book. It's about his rise and as Sam the Banana Man. And one of the reasons that he's so successful is because he has concessions from the Honduran government at the time, because it was a very low margin business. And he relied on those concessions in order to have a profitable business, because it was just as many bananas as he could get out. And then Honduras elects somebody new and threatens to take those concessions away. And so he decides that that's not going to fly. And so he goes down to a bar in the French Quarter and finds some former Honduran politician or president or dictator or something like that and says, hey, I'm going to give you some boats and some guns. Could you go and take over the Honduran government for me and give me back my concessions? And that's exactly what happens. Like, even to the point where the U.S. government is not super happy with it, because U.S. businessmen are just running around doing things in Latin America. Like that's the Roosevelt corollary time period, the foreign policy that we're talking about. That's the sort of thing that was enabled. That was just a funny story, and I think people should read that book. But I think Honduras is actually incredibly important. And if the primacy of nations is important, you should care a lot about Honduran sovereignty and the primacy of Honduras as a nation. If you care about stability in the Caribbean, whether it's migration or drug cartels or about foreign countries being able to use influence, whether economic or station military assets there, that's absolutely something you should worry about. Like, I think it actually does matter in a meaningful way. It's bad that we don't know where Honduras is on a map, and we do know where Iran is, because Honduras is way more important to the existential interests of U.S. foreign policy in the year of our Lord 2025 than Iran is. We don't need oil from the Middle East anymore.
That's crazy. Jacob, that's an insane statement. No, you can't. The one story you gave me about Honduras, which I know because I studied that in my PhD program, is about fucking bananas, man. So unless you're talking about the need for potassium supply or something, like, look, man, like, everybody, like, the United Fruit Company ran the country. Time out. This is a country that was run by a company that produces bananas. No, it's not relevant. Now, migration, yes, it's. But if Honduras was just a mess for the next 50 years, if nobody fixed it, if it continued to pump out immigrants into the US, like, America will just move north. You know what I mean? Like, hey, police, can you do what Honduras didn't? And by the way, look, what is happening in Central America? Like, I don't know. I think everyone on the right, from Peter Thiel down to J.D. Vance, just has a man crush on Nayib Bukele. And they're just trying to replicate these dudes in every one of these tiny countries. I really urged and hesitated from calling them banana countries. But that's where the term comes from, right? Like, so I don't know. Look, I think you win. You win on Honduras. There, you have illustrated the wanton hypocrisy of the Trump administration when it comes to application of this policy on Honduras. Although in the paragraph that I really liked and you didn't, they kind of forewarned that they will be hypocritical. You could argue that paragraph just says we will be hypocritical.
Yeah.
True, right? Like, hey, everybody reading this, we're going to be hypocrites. And you know what my answer to that is? Yeah, that's what great powers are. They are hypocrites. As long as they're aware, the problem with foreign policy of the United States of America for the last 40 years is that between George W. Bush to Bill Clinton to Joe Biden, I think Obama less so, much less so, but most presidents were just wantonly hypocrites without knowing that they were hypocrites. And so you could couch a humanitarian intervention that ends up killing civilians as something we do to protect humans. You could couch an intervention to change a country into a liberal democracy when you just really want oil, and you actually believe this shit. At least these guys, I think, are telling you in that paragraph you don't like. They're telling you, hey, man, we're hypocrites, and we know it. But, can I explain what's going on in Honduras? No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, another part of the document, though, talks about what adjusting U.S. global military presence looks like. And it talks about how you need a more suitable Coast Guard and Navy presence to control sea lanes to thwart illegal migration and human and drug trafficking. You need targeted deployments to secure the border and defeat cartels. You need to establish access in strategically important locations. Pardoning drug traffickers and getting rid of Maduro, who wants to give you all the things that you want, are not ways to further that strategy.
Okay, but let's double click on that because we never finished that. That was your other question. Your first question was what's going on in Honduras, to which I replied, I have no idea.
And which it doesn't matter.
You win.
I think you can argue that Iran is just pistachios and oil. We don't need oil anymore, but I'm being flippant. Sorry, go ahead.
But we do need pistachios, bro. Dubai chocolate is on the
You're in
rise. I don't know if you've
California.
noticed
You're
this, but the
fine. We're
trend.
fine with pistachios. It's us and them, and they're
We're
going to
fine.
have no water in like 10 years. Like when I go do ag events, one of the only
Oh.
audiences I'm like, y'all are good, is pistachios. Doesn't matter that the world is multipolar. You're the only game in
No.
town. Do whatever you want.
That's hilarious. Okay. But listen, on Maduro, yeah, I hear you. I wonder if this is about image perception, and this is just like, as Drake would say it, for the gram. What do I mean by that? It appears, and this is publicly sourced information, it appears a month ago that Maduro already gave Jacob everything that they want. Maybe even longer. You brought this up on our podcast like 2 months ago. Okay, but it happened too easily, and they want to do some show. They want Pete Hegseth to do like fucking 20 pull-ups from his glistening biceps as he's saying like kill them all. Like there is part of this that is clearly.
I love it. I love it. I love it. You're going to call it for the gram. In the 1960s, they would have called this for credibility when it comes to communism. It's the same damn thing. It's no different than anything else we've been talking about.
Well, I mean, but again, the proof will be in the pudding. Look, if over the next 6 months we start hearing that Venezuela needs to be liberated from socialists, if in the next 6 months we hear that the United States of America is going to send troops to Venezuela, you will be proven correct. They're not applying the foreign policy that's illustrated here. But if Trump just drags this out for the gram, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, say that the whole thing falls on its face? No. In fact, what happens, Jacob, if this does drag out by 6 months, they kill another 500 people fishing in the Caribbean, which is unfortunate, but kind of a fraction of what Obama did with drones, But let's say that happens. Let's say that this happens over the next 6 months. You're pounding the table every time we're on this podcast, like, look at what they're doing. And then 6 months later, they're like, okay, fine, Maduro, you can go. Like, we did enough gramming. This will be the greatest American foreign policy coup of like the last 100 years. You flipped the country by like bombing some poor fishermen. You didn't really deploy any troops. Not a single American died. Very few Venezuelans died. And the country becomes friendly, kicks out Russians and Chinese. Like, low cost, high impact, right? High return on your investment.
Yeah, the proof is in the banana pudding, if you will. And hey, like, on Poly Market, like they've got U.S. Venezuela military engagement by March at 52% odds. It's been sort of climbing in recent weeks.
It might have to happen. Look, Trump may need something to blow up on the ground in Venezuela so that he can then tell Maduro to leave, because then it looks like he actually did something.
Funny. This is where I want to zag, because, okay, everything I've said so far on the podcast, get ready, like buckle your seatbelt, listeners. I think Trump doesn't believe any of this nonsense. I think he is the pragmatic person without being pragmatist. I think that is Donald Trump, and I think he wants no part of bombing Venezuela. And if I'm right about that, I don't think he cares. If I'm right about that, the U.S. isn't going to bomb Venezuela. To your point, this is all for the gram. Like, they only bombed Iran because Israel forced it. Like, Guyana is not going to do to Venezuela what Israel did to Iran. So if that's correct, then it's not going to happen. And then if that Poly Market thing starts to climb, like, just take the under. Like, take the he's not going to do it.
Just take the under. Okay, but let's say that you're right then. If that does happen, then this strategy is a brilliant document, and Trump is a pretty good manipulator.
The second part of that sentence is correct. The first, it can't save the document just because President Trump saved it.
Why?
Because the document, well, we have to deal with the Honduras and the other thing there as well. I think the document is just all over the place. There's too many cooks in the kitchen.
But Jacob, your problems with the documents are Sudan and Honduras.
No,
brother, like,
no.
That's
I hear you. And let me be not flippant for a second, because I have a tendency to be too flippant. My main problem with the document, and my main problems with the document, I just said the same sentence twice in a row. But let's say it for a third time. My main problems with the document, because there's two of them, is that I just don't think it's based in any sense of reality. And when I say that, I'm saying specifically the things about the President of Peace. I know it's funny. It's just not true. And if you keep telling yourself the same lie over and over again, people are going to believe that, because remember, I think people are fundamentally stupid. So if you put it out there and say it,
So
you're
wait,
going to
you're
say
saying
something that's not true over and over again. People are going to think that's the way that it is and then make decisions based on a faulty
wait, hold on a
worldview.
second,
Hold
hold
on,
on a second,
let me finish. And then the second thing is just this idea that the United States is better at everything. We're better at goods. We're better at technology. We're better at all this other stuff. You just have to come along with us and things that are good. That's just not true. Like, those are two things that the policy is entirely based
that's
on
not,
that have no basis in reality whatsoever. Anyway, go ahead.
that's the document actually doesn't say that. There's many parts of the document where they say we need to like rebuild America because we actually have fallen behind. The argument, the line you're reading is we need to convince the rest of the world that we are going to be better at this stuff. So they buy this stuff from us, not from China. But it's a call for competition. I actually like that sentence because it says, previous documents from both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, which had very little daylight between them, the previous documents would say China's evil, China's bad. This document says China's kicking our ass. Don't blame Latin American countries for doing business with China. Blame us. Why haven't we not done anything? So that's the way I see that. The first point, the reason I interrupted you,
Okay.
and I apologize, is that I just wanted to hear what you said. I didn't hear it properly. So you were saying like all this peace stuff, like this idea that Trump is a president of peace is just not true.
That's not reality.
But I disagree with you on that. But it is. Like, and this is, look, when President Trump became president in 2016, I wrote an analysis for my client saying like World War III odds went up. And then the data and empirical evidence shows that over the last 5 years, he started the fewest wars out of anyone else. He's truly ended them. Now your point is that when they list accomplishments, they're not real. I agree with you. It's bullshit. You listed 9 things, 8 are lies. They're just ass kissing, right? But the corollary of that is, who are you comparing Donald Trump to? Who are you comparing him to? Because you're giving him this incredible like podium where you're saying, I'm going to judge Trump based on Trump's track record. And you're saying, hey, you guys in the White House, you're taking credit for 8 peace deals you didn't do anything on. But let's just be very clear. It's not America's fault that Cambodia and Thailand are fighting. It's not America's fault of what's going on in Sudan, not directly at least. No, I mean, no one in the White House was like, ooh, let's have civilians in Sudan die. So your point that they didn't do enough to prevent these wars from happening and then claim success is cogent. It's true. You're correct. But it's also like, meh, okay, whatever. It's just kiss-assing. Whereas, let's compare him to every previous American president who did start new wars. And this is my problem with the media's focus on this and the liberal take on this. It's like President Trump is lying. Oh, Jesus Christ. Really? The President of the United States of America is lying and taking credit for accomplishments he didn't achieve? That's not really new, although it is kind of new in the scope of how it is. But the reality is that Trump has to be compared to previous presidents. And just because he didn't actually produce peace in a conflict he had nothing to do about, in my book, is still superior to spending $2 trillion pursuing wars or using humanitarian intervention as an excuse for distracting the public from the fact that a 21-year-old intern probably gave you a blowjob in the Oval Office. Like, that is what's happened in the past.
No, I appreciate that point. That allows me to sharpen what I'm saying a little bit, because I was just as critical of some of the Biden national security papers because I thought they were blatantly neoconservative, and I thought that they were applying totally analytically wrong mental maps to the world. And I said at the time of some of Biden's strategy, you can go back and check the receipts. I said, if this is how this administration is going to think about the world, its policies are not going to work, because these are the wrong frameworks, these are the wrong mental maps, and if you think these things, you are going to get the wrong policies. You're not going to get the policies that get you to what your goals are. I think the exact same thing is true of this document. When I don't really care about the lying. I expect lying from politicians. What I care about is that the things in this document, this worldview, in some sense, it's completely on the other end of the spectrum, but it's also not true. It to me smells of a document that has no sense of the world as it actually is. It has a stronger sense of what the United States should be and what the United States should want and things like that, but its diagnosis of the world and the U.S. position of the world, I think it's wrong. And just on the thing about lying, like I guess it's still technically a lie, but in Robert Caro's books about LBJ, there's this thing about where I think it's LBJ talks about how, I forget if it's LBJ said this or Caro says this about LBJ, where it's when he was trying to tell himself something that wasn't true, he had to tell it to himself so much so that he actually believed it was true. So that when he was acting on it, it was not a lie to him. He passionately and fervently believed it, even if it began as a lie that he concocted himself. I think that's part of what's going on here. When I say drinking the Kool-Aid, I think there's a lie, which is about ingratiating yourself to President Trump or blah, 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 blah. And I think they're believing the lie. And that's the same thing the previous administration did. So to your point, yes, I had lots of, I said lots of mean things about the Biden administration approach to these things because I thought they were neocons. And my biggest complaints in this document are the neocons running roughshod over Venezuela, right? Like in that sense, I'm at least consistent. But my other problem is just the reality, the sense of reality in the document.
Well, I think that summarizes our disagreement. I think this document is brilliant in that it is absolutely compatible with what the world looks like today. This is how you should comport yourself. Now, your point is that they're not going to comport themselves like this. I don't think you disagree with me that if you believe the world is multipolar, ensuring balance of power and being an offshore balancer is the wrong thing to do.
Well, let me poke at that a little bit. Do you agree? Because they were talking about the primacy of nations from a desired policy choice. Like they want nations to have the
No, they're saying they are. That's not the outcome.
It's also,
like,
but they want that to be the
like?
case. They want to go after international organizations and cartels and all these other things so that the primacy of nations can be safeguarded. Like we can argue about whether they think it is true or not. I'm not sure that the 21st century will see the primacy of nations. Like, what if we're talking about the rise of non-state actors or of cryptocurrencies or of small city-states and things like that don't look anything like the 20th century version of the nation state? Like, I'm not sure that's the right diagnosis. Do you think that the primacy of nation states continues in this century for the rest of the century?
I mean, that's a long time. It's 75 years, right? Like, so I would argue that currently in 2025, nations are prime. I would say that unbalanced multipolar system is a huge risk to World War III. And so I would argue that, for the next 5 years, which is, these national security strategies get reviewed every 5 years or so. So I would say, okay, you've pointed out a failing of this document. It maybe isn't creative enough to think about the next 30 years. Agreed.
Well, even for the next 5 years, then, do you think that like the nation state, that the primacy of nation states continues and increases? Or do you think that the primacy of nation states is declining with some of the things that we're seeing in the world right now? Like that's an open question. That's not a criticism of the document.
I would say that the biggest risks right now to the world are that China takes a wrong message on Taiwan and invades it. I would say that Russia and Europe don't find some strategic balance, and that the Middle East becomes, so like your examples of where this hypocrisy or this document or its strategy are wrong are Honduras, Venezuela, and 8 out of 9 peace deals that Trump did not actually successfully conclude. Whereas I keep going back to the 3 things that matter: Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, China, West, where I think that the Trump administration has correctly applied this primacy of nations and balance of power. They didn't abandon Taiwan. I was very afraid that when this document came out, it was like, YOLO, whatever happens in East Asia happens. They did not do that. With Europe, it's super critical of liberal Europe, and there's a whole civilizational stuff that clearly, you're right, has racial and civilizational undertones. But again, they didn't abandon Europe. They say Europe is extremely important. Stability of Europe is critical to America. Like, on all the issues that I think really matter, I do think this document applies a strategy, articulates a strategy. The world is multipolar. There's 2 types of multipolar worlds you can have. Unbalanced one that leads to war, that leads to armed camps waiting to go to war with one another. The other one is a balanced one. Somebody needs to create that balance. Usually it's an offshore balancer. And this document sets that out. Now, whether they're going to correctly pursue it, we shall see. But it's the first time in American foreign policy that I'm seeing somebody speak in those terms. That's why I defend it. But I certainly don't think that you can apply this document to everything that's going on in the world and say it was correctly applied. But I think fundamentally this is where we disagree. What do you think the world looks like, and what would you do to fix it? Maybe we just disagree on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't get paid to do
But you know
policy.
what?
You know,
Two
I get
things.
paid to understand policy and where it's going to go, which is also like this.
But no, but that's what I get paid to
Yeah.
do too. Just to be clear, like I always tell my clients, like, look, I'm not here to I'm not here to evaluate policy in its own, but I do have to evaluate it relative to what I think the world is. And that's exactly what I did with this document. I believe the world is multipolar. I believe that if American policymakers think it's not and try to rescue American hegemony, they will start World War III.
And you don't think this document is about restoring American hegemony?
No, that's why the primacy of nations and saying, hey, you guys get to do whatever you want domestically. We're not going to interfere. It does say, hey, let's not redraw the sphere of influence, but it does say the sphere of influence are something. There's literally a line where it says great powers throughout history have had influence over smaller powers. It's a nod to Russia and China. Hey, guys, we recognize your sphere of influence. Whereas Hillary Clinton's famous statement in 2011 was the United States will never accept sphere of influence of other powers. So yeah, I think this document sets out that the world is multipolar and we will defend our interests, but we're not going to try to paint you as the next Hitler. Just hear us out. Don't invade Taiwan, okay? But should you have greater influence in Laos, in Cambodia, and maybe even in Kazakhstan, China?
But help me with
go
that.
ahead.
If we're gonna recognize China's sphere of influence, why not just let them have Taiwan? Because that is their sphere of influence.
Well, because great question. Because that would be calamitous today, and the document sets out why. It sets out why today you cannot let China do that. It says Taiwan is critical to the modern economy. Now, if 5-10 years from now, that is no longer the case, you're right. The United States of America will say, hey, China, listen, Taiwan is no longer critical to the global economy, whose stability is important to us. So go ahead and take it. So that's where I think, there is enough flexibility in this document for change of that. It tries to create balance of power. My whole point here is if the world is multipolar, you don't want it to descend into a fight. So how do you do that? You carve out spheres of influence and you defend them. And you say, hey, look, man, that's why you're so flexible about giving Ukrainian territory to Russia. But you tell Russia, but listen, stability of Europe is important, which the document does. Now, anyways, we've talked a lot about this. Two things we did not mention, Jacob, which are dear to both of our hearts. So who was the writer of the national security strategy? It was Kevin Harrington. Kevin Harrington is the, I think, managing director for strategic planning at the NSC. He's also former managing director at Teal Capital. So what we did not talk about, and I think a lot of civilizational stuff is very Peter Thielian. Peter Thiel really cares about Western civilization, which yes has racial undertones for sure. I don't think he would disagree with that. Although he would probably also say, but it doesn't have to be racial, but he probably is, just objectively speaking. So there is a lot of that, which I find unnecessary and unseemly in this document. But let's leave that aside. The other thing about it is that Peter Thiel, although he has actually a pretty nuanced view on AI, there was a lot of coverage about him shorting or selling his Nvidia stock recently. He did buy back into Microsoft, by the way, so it's not like he was but he has a very nuanced view of AI, which I think aligns with our Ludditeness a little bit. He is as maybe critical as we are, but he's also one of the foremost investors in all of these. OpenAI, he's seen as Sam Altman's mentor and so on. So what am I getting at? The two things we did not talk about is the fact that this document is pretty positive on AI and crypto.
Yes, that's true. And we'll need a whole another episode for it because I can hear that my children are waking up from their naps. But it's fun. I mean, Peter Thiel also had a whole thing. I mean, this was years ago now where Peter Thiel was talking about how AI was communist and crypto was, I think was it libertarian or something like that? This was a huge talking point 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, certainly, yeah, AI could certainly enable communism, that's for sure. But no, all I want to say to we got to go, obviously, and we've spent a lot of this. But this document was written by somebody who was basically in the financial industry at a hedge fund, working for a tech entrepreneur. And so I do think that the focus on digital assets, which have a really prominent place here, like they will preserve American financial hegemony. You and I did not spend any time on that paragraph.
We didn't, but that's
finance.
sort of what I was getting at with the question about the primacy of nations, because I think they think that with their whole stablecoin strategy, and I think actually they're sowing the exact opposite thing. Like, we're going to talk about networks of humans who are not going to be beholden to the states because they have their own, like, you know, their ability to make their own fiscal and monetary policy.
But here's what I say this, you know, I know we got to go. We can spend a whole hour on just stable coins and
maybe we will.
AI. But the reason I thought this was really interesting is because it means that the President Trump in this White House and the author of this document have, and I don't have any value judgment on this, I'm just stating it. They've just told you that AI, CapEx, investment boom, and digital assets are pillars of national security. Maybe not as important as everything you and I are debating and arguing about today. We've spent like an hour and a half basically arguing about all this esoteric political science, qualitative, you know, fun stuff. I mean, we have fun.
Got to give the people what they want, you know. But I'm sure the people want that too.
But Jacob, but the interesting thing is that we didn't spend any time on the fact that, like, we are in an AI CapEx boom. You and I think, agree it's a bubble.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
But this document says that the United States of America does not care if, quote unquote, we build too many data centers. That's what it says to you. It says it's part of national security. It means, you know what it means? If you're out there being super, super smart and trying to short like AI or crypto, you just got to understand you're fighting against the US government. Now, Made in China 2025 listed a bunch of industries. Not all of them did well for investors. Just because the government says something is national security doesn't mean it's a great investment. Eventually, bubbles are bubbles, and they will all be pierced by the needle of material reality. But at least right now, I think it's far more likely that the government enacts in bailouts of these endeavors than that it lets them fall by the wayside.
Yes, I do.
You see what I mean? Like, they've hitched their wagon hard to these two technologies. Now, I know you've written and talked about digital assets far more than I mean, I think you're far more crypto curious than I am. But look, who cares about like that? The real, like, what's driving the US economy is the AI investment boom. And I think that this document says, like, look, man, we're going to, like, YOLO, let's go. Like, we need more data centers. It's like, well, do you? National security, baby. So I thought that was also interesting.
Well, and I've been wrestling with myself. What does that actually mean in the long run? Does that mean, to your point, that they do get bailed out, and that means that we get really low, much lower energy costs than we're thinking for, and so AI and productivity and growth goes crazy? Does this mean that the average American consumer gets screwed yet again and has to pay higher prices in order to bail out the utility companies, some of these others themselves? Like, you know,
that's the second. Listen, well, Jacob, it depends what you think as an investor the ultimate benefits of AI are going to be. But I am a Luddite. For those of you who don't know the word, look it up. It means that you're skeptical of this technology. But also, I just don't think that a bunch of 4-star generals or former investors who may or may not still be like monetarily compensated by the AI boom in some way, shape, or form. Like, I just don't think that they know what's best from a technological perspective. I don't know. Someone should do a study. Has national security strategy of the United States of America correctly forecast technological innovation in the last 100 years? Like, I would bet no.
Ooh, I would bet yes. And this goes to where probably the most important thing the Trump administration did was slash science and research funding at the beginning of the administration, all the Doge stuff. Like, that was the worst possible thing you could have done if what you want is to be at the head of AI and everything else.
Well, Right. But exactly. So, like, Okay, but and then at the same time you say AI is going to be a huge thing. Well,
and this gets to my point.
Look,
we're going to have the best products. We are the best long-term buy. No, we're not. Nothing we've done in the last 12 months says anything that we're going to be the best long-term buy. If you think that, if what you're looking for is the best long-term buy, you should be calling Beijing right now. Like, they won. They already won.
Well, that's aspirational. That's
aspirational,
you know.
Yeah.
No, but listen, I think that I don't want to put a value judgment on this because who knows? Why would Marko Papic be right on AI? I can barely pivot an Excel table, Jacob. Okay, I'm not a tech bro, right? But all I'm saying is, I think it ends in tears. I think my timeline of when it ends probably got extended just because of this document. That's how profound it is.
It's fun.
President of the United States of America. It's just hitching his wagon.
I think we should pick it up there next time and do a whole thing on that. But I also just want to close by saying, I think there's something about, because you and I are not that far apart in age at all, but I think those couple years actually matter, because I would never describe myself as a Luddite. And I think maybe that's because I came of age just around the time that tech was starting to I remember doing HTML coding for fun when I was in middle school. And I remember everything from MS-DOS to Windows XP and now all the shit that we have right now. It's all fun for me. Tech, I'm native in it in a weird way. And it sounds like you don't feel like you are. And I feel like anybody who's even just a couple years older than me has that sort of, I'm a Luddite, I don't know how to do all these other different things. And to your point about, the U.S. government, I mean, I remember that congressional hearing where somebody was presenting information in front of a congressional committee. I forget what the committee was. The research was from Substack, and this congresswoman just could not understand what Substack was. She was like, what is Substack? How do you access it? Is this a newspaper? Is this a what? And I was like, oh my God, these people are managing technology strategy and policy. My God. Anyway.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's the age. I think it's the fact that I've been in private markets for 6 years, and which is not a lot. But it's a lot to have seen a lot of tech bros show up in my office and say a bunch of stuff in semi-on spectrum kind of tone of voice, with 80% of words are, unintelligible to a normal human being, and they think that's good. So then I will give them money. And it's like, you just created a new bank that targets yoga instructors. And that's your innovation. All I think is that a lot of it is snake oil.
Yeah, no.
And not because the technology itself, it's not because technology is to blame, but it's just that it's a money-making machine. And so that's where I think that this AI stuff will be cool. It's just not going to be AGI. And I'm not sure that's what valuations in our data center build-out is okay with. We're building this stuff as if no. This will replace Jacob and Marko. You will never have to listen to Geopolitical Cousins. There'll be a better AI-enabled podcast. And I don't think that's where we're going. We're going towards a world where it's a really big deal and we all need to know how to use AI. But so that's where I think.
And hey, maybe we'll get a better authoritarian ruler of Venezuela too. Who needs a person? Let's just get our AI agent in charge.
I know, you can just download.
Who needs to get the banana boats down to Honduras? Let's just send an AI agent and have it inhabit a body.
Yes, download and install and reboot your system, and you'll be fine.
We've got blue screen of death on El Salvador. Can you restart that?
Ctrl delete, baby.
All right, we'll leave it there. Oh, I could have gone on another hour. Control delete. It's not bad. No, it was actually